Hey, this is Mr. York. This is video number 3. Today we're going to be talking about storage. Over here on the right you see a really archaic form of storage. This is a floppy disk. The only place that you might still see this, because we're not using these anymore, is if you actually go to right up here. If you're using Microsoft Office, which I am for this presentation, you can see it says save this presentation, and that right there is the current place that you would only see a floppy disk. So as you can see, that icon was used for saving, started years ago, and they just have never stopped using that as the symbol for saving. So as we talk about storage today, that's a good place to start. Is floppy disk. The first floppy disk was a 5 1/4. It was actually quite a bit bigger than this, and it only stored about 100 kilobytes. Now in our last lesson we talked about what bytes are and how if you have 1,000 of them together, you'd get 1 kilobyte. This is 100 kilobytes, so that's 100,000 bytes. It's the easiest way to say that. This was surpassed a few years later by the 3.5 floppy, which holds 1.44 megabytes or 1,440,000 bytes. We came out with something called a zip drive, had 100 megabytes. That was really nice because you could hold 100 times almost. Not quite 100 times this, but quite a bit more than that. And if you were trying to do a really intense presentation, we sometimes had to go to a zip drive, and that was very useful. Or if we just had a lot of documents to store. We got to a point where our memory became so cheap that we could actually carry around several different devices that stored all of our data on them, and we could use them almost like hard drives. A CD is still usable, I feel like. Some of you guys have them in your cars, and if you have just a few pictures to send to somebody, or if you want to burn some music, then this is still the best way to do it, because you can play a CD just about anywhere, even if you're in your DVD players or Blu-ray players, if you have those at home. Now the problem is that a lot of people are getting rid of drives, and they consider that whole thing to be an archaic technology because of streaming. But there are things that you can do with those that you can't do with streaming, so I still feel like they'll be around for a little bit, and there are still people buying Blu-rays, if nothing else, for the special features on them. So a DVD is 4.3 gigabytes, and if you guys want to store a whole bunch of video files, or maybe just one giant movie, or several different videos, or video series, it's still the cheapest way to do it if you can burn a DVD. The problem is that if you try to give it to a client today, they're going to tell you, I don't have a DVD player and I don't know what to do with this. So that's still a problem. So here it is written out. 100,000 bytes equals 100 kilobytes. That's for the 5 1/4 floppy. The 1,440,000 bytes, the 1.44 megabyte floppy disk, that's this one here. And it has a plastic case on it, but underneath there is just a floppy disk. And that's still our standard. 1 gigabyte equals 240 songs. So how many songs could you store on one of these? This one I don't think you could even store a song. This one you might be able to store one. CDs you can store about 20 songs depending on their size, but that's the idea. And of course DVDs you can store a whole mess of songs on because there's several gigs, so you can kind of see that, right? When it comes to more storage, continued, we have a few more items here, and of course at some point, about 10 years ago, back in, I want to say 2000, about 2000 actually, about 2002 was the first time, 2001, 2002, turn of the century, if you will, was the first time that I heard somebody using a USB drive. And now they're everywhere, and they're super useful. The first ones were as small as 32 megabytes, and now pretty much the largest ones that we see are about 256 gigabytes, and you may be able to find more, but by the time you get into that price range, you might as well just buy a portable hard drive. It's basically the same technology, but it's a lot harder to lose. If you can see, like, these ones are 128 gigs and they're tiny. And we figured out that we really don't need them to be any bigger, but they go by several different names, including thumb drives, because they're about as big as your thumb. These ones are closer to a thumbnail. Some of them are really cool to use for clients and for other businesses to put their logo on and then hand them out. I've actually gone to several conferences where they've given me information on a thumb drive, and that's kind of cool. Hard drives, of course, start around 500 gigabytes, and your SSD drives are even lower than that. Some of those are 128, 256, and then of course 500 and on up to, you could have 16 terabytes if you want. It's just a matter of how much money you want to spend on it. A Blu-ray disc is kind of an interesting thing. As I said, we don't use those as much anymore, but if you had a blank Blu-ray disc and you could actually burn a Blu-ray, you could store up to 28 gigabytes on it. Now keep in mind, in all of this stuff that we've been talking about, all we've talked about so far is bytes, and that's because that's how you measure storage. Whether it's RAM, which is volatile storage that disappears the second you turn off your computer, or long-term storage such as a USB drive, a CD, a DVD, a floppy disk, any of these devices, it's all in terms of bytes. So if you want to hear about the next time that we're going to be using a different measurement, go ahead and watch the next video, which has to do with processor speed.